You know, it has been said that a reporter is a person who is paid to get their education in public. Well, our next guest has had quite the span of education and journalism. Meet Will Snyder. Welcome.
Yeah.
You know, we met back in the mid-1980s when I was writing for the Bay Area Reporter and you were my editor. Mm-hmm. How has journalism changed from the time when you were a cub reporter on the sports desk in Grand Rapids, Michigan, correct?
Right.
Up to covering AIDS, HIV for the Bay Area Reporter. What has it been like to see that change over 30 years?
Well, in a way, I'm a little bit disconsolate about some aspects of it because I think we're seeing more of the element of Fox News and even journalism that will not tell the other side of a story. And that has been, I think, one of the biggest difficulties in following journalism from back a ways in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, because back when you were starting as a writer, when I was starting as a writer back in the late 70s, early 80s, that wasn't called journalism. That was called that was an editorial. If you gave your opinion.
Exactly.
And even then, most legit news outlets would say, well, if Will Snyder is going to be on the left, we're going to have David Perry on the right. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, it's either just all left or all right. There seems to be nothing in the middle.
Yeah, that's certainly something that's happened a great deal in that respect. I mean, when I was in college, I edited my college paper for 2 years, and I was considered the quintessential left-winger. But I had short hair. Yet, nevertheless, I went out of my way as soon as I got the job to get a column in the paper that would be just the opposite of what I felt. So I got William F. Buckley.
Well, that would be about as far the opposite of far left as you could get.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first column I ran of Buckley's was where he was explaining how he got on NBC's, what was the show?
Crossfire.
No, not Crossfire. It was the Saturday Night Comic Show.
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. It was another show, but at any rate, they said that he only agreed to be on the show as long as they flew him out on a plane with 2 right wings. But I mean, overall, when you look at journalism, I think of the classic scene in All the President's Men where Ben Bradley says to Woodward and Bernstein, 3 sources, 4 sources. Get all those sources. Don't just rely on one thing. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what's missing in the business, the fairness of it. When I think, wrote probably one of the better articles that I felt I ever wrote, which was about the commission, the first AIDS commission, I said at the time, I interviewed a guy named Rich DeVos, who was the CEO of Amway, and he said something like, well, you know, those people, they get that disease because they deserve it because of the way they fool around and everything. And so I asked him, and he was very polite and said, oh, yeah, I said those things. But the thing about it is that I hung up and I thought, all right, am I going to just write an editorial type of thing and damn him, or am I going to try and write something that's fair and just quotes him? And I said, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I had something go through my head right away. Hey, I got to call the White House on this. And they gave me the guy named Gary Bauer.
Who became, of course, quite famous as a right-wing strategist.
Yep. And Gary Bauer said to me, I said to him, Mr. Bauer, we have a number of people in the LGBT community who are complaining about the fact you don't have a single doctor or scientist on this commission. You just have President Reagan's friends. And he says, well, you know, we're not trying to solve this disease at all. We just want to know how many beds we need. And I thought, wow.
And he said that to you on the record?
You bet.
Now, that story became quite famous during the AIDS years, and you won an award from the Human Rights Commission based on the work you did writing about the AIDS, HIV epidemic. As a gay man living in San Francisco, which was, to use a hackneyed cliche, the epicenter of AIDS, HIV for many in the gay community, how did that make you feel? Was it hard to be objective?
Well, because of my training, I had to be. I mean, there was just no other way around it. I mean, as much as I might feel disgusted with the person, I had to tell the whole story as best I could possibly do it. And the same thing, I was thinking of a quote from Walter Cronkite on this, and Spiro Agnew was complaining about how the right wing, or the East Coast establishment,
the
of
negative
the media,
nabobs of negativism.
Yeah, right. It was a great quote. So Cronkite says, well, listen, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. Chet Huntley's from North Dakota. And Dan Rather, or Montana, I think it was. And Dan Rather's from Dallas, Texas. That's pretty East Coast, isn't it?
How has being a gay man impacted your journalism? And now I want to go back a little bit in time. You were originally from
Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And you started as a cub reporter there in Grand Rapids, and you were covering sports.
Yeah.
What was it like to be a young gay man covering sports in Grand Rapids, Michigan in, well, pre-Stonewall America?
Well, it was different because I was one of those kinds of individuals who just really wasn't aware of his sexual orientation at that time. Part of it is just the kind of environment you're raised in. Grand Rapids is a conservative town. To give you an idea, that was President Ford's congressional district, and he was in the Congress, and sometimes they thought he was too liberal. But it was difficult then, but it was just like I didn't really get an inkling as to sexual orientation at that time. All I knew is that it was difficult for me to date girls.
So covering sports then, when you finally came out, what was that like? I know your coming out story was challenging and difficult.
Yeah, well, like I said, there was a very, very difficult movement going on right now at that time in journalism to try and weed out the people who were not the right way, so to speak.
Meaning weed out the gay people.
That's right. And at my hometown newspaper, there was an opera editor who was entrapped. And at that time, I had an idea about myself.
You mean he was entrapped because he was gay?
Right.
So the police entrapped him in some sort of sexual imbroglio, or?
Well, it was like a restroom inside the building of the newspaper.
Right, but they entrapped him to out him.
Yep. And I was very fearful of that, but I was thinking about that all the time. The pressure was immense in my life at the time. I was in some of the best reporting I've ever done.
And what period are we talking about? What years?
That'd be 1976, 77. And, you know, at that time I was much heavier than I am now. And so whenever I would try to sneak out and go to some places to meet people, it was like, you know, I'm not the Adonis that everyone was looking for, you know, in their minds anyway. Little I know there'd be a bear movement 30 or 40 years later.
Yeah, I mistakenly said it was pre-Stonewall. I should have said it was the pre-bear movement. Yeah. Sorry.
So I was entrapped. Well, I can't say I was entrapped. I was lonely, and I was arrested. And the thing about it, though, is that it was probably, in some senses, in terms of my personal life, was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me, because then I began to realize who I was.
Right.
I hung around the gay group called Dignity at the time.
Which is the Catholic gay group.
Right, exactly. But there weren't all Catholics in there either. I mean, it was just a magnet for people in Grand Rapids to be with that group. And we had some great times, and we learned to get along with each other.
So now you said in retrospect it was one of the best things that happened to you, but what happened to you? Did they put your name in the paper? I mean, did you lose your job?
Eventually I lost my job.
And were you harassed at work by the other reporters?
No. What happened was that it happened. It happened on St. Patrick's Day, actually, and you know, at that time, two of our reporters were down in Lakeland, Florida, covering the Detroit Tigers for spring training, and we were shorthanded. And I said, "Listen, I'll stay on for another month or so," and they were willing to take advantage of that.
Even by this time, they all knew you were gay.
Right. So I stayed on. I was editing. See, one of my jobs at the paper at that time was I was what they called a slot man. And the slot man was the person who not only assigned the size of the articles, but assigned what page they were going to be on and everything. It was an assistant sports editor. And so I just decided, you know, I mean, I have friends who are going to be called out of their jobs if I don't help them out a little bit at least. But once I was gone from the paper, I went through a period of time where I really struggled financially, but I learned an awful lot about what it was like to be a different kind of person than I thought I was. And in the long run, that was very good for me, because when I finally moved out to San Francisco in 1979, I began the process, first of all, of finding a job, finding someone to live with, and just learning to be myself. And by 1983, 84, I started writing for the Sentinel. You may remember
I
that
remember the
paper.
old San Francisco Sentinel, Ray Chalker.
Yep. And then eventually, a friend of mine, Ray O'Loughlin, went from the Sentinel over to the BAR, and we'd become friends by that time. And Ray appreciated my background as far as editing is concerned and everything. He wanted me to come over with him. Bob Ross, I don't think, was that hot on my coming over because I probably didn't suit his
That's the
picture.
The legendary publisher and founder of the Bay Area Reporter.
We loved him, but we referred to him as William Randolph Harumph.
Listen, we're going to go a little bit long on this interview because I want to ask you about a couple of other questions.
Sure.
From your time covering sports and then coming out, basically at that time ruining your life as you knew it, did it make you dislike sports, or do you still find sports fascinating? Do you still follow it?
Very much so.
So we're San Francisco just hosted the 50th Super Bowl, and there was a lot of controversy about it, but I guess there always is. But now for the first time, there's an openly gay player. I remember seeing pictures in the Bay Area Reporter of Michael Sam and thinking, boy, when I was a kid, just trying to butch it up at the local high school football game and not let anyone know that I was gay, and here we've got Michael Sam, who certainly is about as butch as they come at a gay bar watching a game. What do you think about this?
It's refreshing. I mean, it started, first of all, when I was back at the BAR, and I had a chance to re-review Dave Kopay's book.
And Dave Kopay being the first known NFL player to be gay, although he came out after
he retired. And I liked a lot of the book, but I was also critical of the way Dave told the story. It seemed like it was going back and forth between person, second person, third person, whatever. And so I was a little bit critical of that, and he blew up with me over the phone about that. And he says, how dare you do that kind of thing? And I says, well, listen, I don't care whether you're the guy I'd love to fall in love with or the guy I can't stand. I'm still going to review you for how good or how bad you do this.
Right, I'm not going to give you a pass because you're gay.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I still think Dave was a fine football player. University of Washington, and then later on to the 49ers and the Lions and other teams. And I respect that.
All right.
But
well,
go ahead.
I've only got just a couple more questions in our limited time. I want to ask you, though, as someone who follows sports, do you think the NFL is doing a good job of helping its gay players, or you think they just want this to go away? They would love it if Michael Sam had just shut up.
I think they're going through the motions because they've also had other sports who have stepped forward, the NBA especially, because David Stern, who is still the commissioner, had a brother who's gay. And so,
well, and the head of the Golden State Warriors is openly gay.
Exactly. And Major League Baseball has just hired Billy Beane, who used to play for the Dodgers and the Padres and the Tigers, and he wrote a book a few years ago about being openly gay, or what it cost him as a closeted gay player, and then later on he lost his lover. He was sent down to the minor leagues the same day, and so I mean I think that baseball is trying very hard to take steps in that direction, but I think that the NFL is a little bit slower, and it's because of the atmosphere in the locker room.
Right. Last question for you, and I'd love to have you on again for next Super Bowl. We'll talk about that next year. In your long career and varied career, what is the highlight and what was the single worst day?
Oh boy, that's a good question. I would say the highlight of my career was when I was at the Ypsilanti Press, and I was sort of a strange duck in one respect for people in the Detroit media because I didn't drive a car. And so when I would go, say, to Detroit to cover the Tigers or the Lions, I'd take the bus to go into town. And so this also happened to be one time I was covering a basketball game at Eastern Michigan University in Ypsilanti, and I was, I had all of a sudden I got very sick, and I realized I wouldn't even be able to get back to the paper to write the story. So I called up my brother-in-law to come pick me up, and I called up the paper and I dictated the story off the top of my head. And my brother-in-law was an English professor, and he told my sister earlier on, he says, he didn't have one spelling mistake or one grammatical mistake.
Right.
And that's something I think I'm very proud of.
So doing it on the fly. And what about your worst day?
Well, the worst day was when I had the arrest.
Right.
Because that's something that said, you know, you're never going to do what you've been doing that you had a lot of fun doing, and now it's gone.
Glad you bounced back. Good to see you, Will.
Good to see you, David.
We've been speaking to Will Snyder. Next, we're going to speak with filmmaker and curator H.P. Mendoza about this year's CamFest. What's hot in Asian American film? We'll be right back.
Wow, thanks a lot.
Thank you.